to change the venue was Rodney King. Before we talk about that precedent, because that proved key, on what grounds do you file these motions? On what grounds are they granted? What do you have to show a judge to get a venue changed?
You pretty much have to show a judge that you can't get a fair and impartial jury, and they're filed very regularly, and they are denied almost invariably, except infra Rodney King, when a police officer is involved.
So in the Rodney King case, that case was tried in Simi Valley outside of Los Angeles. It was and the community there was much whiter, more affluent than the demographic composition of, say, a Los Angeles jury pool. Yeah. And a lot of people think that was key to what ended up happening in the verdict of that trial.
Right. I mean, look, let's be clear. The venue is huge here. And in a way, you can understand this motion as a parable about the failure of policing itself. You know, it's like this. The fact that different races and different places will see this case as differently as they will tells you an enormous amount about the sort of heartbreaking legacy of stop and frisk and of the kind of policing practices that the Baltimore Police Department has been engaged in Baltimore.
And by that, you mean that the interpretation of this is going to be so dependent about where people are in terms of their own life experience, how they've interacted with the police, and that is so much a product of the prism of race and also where you fall in the socioeconomic scale.
Yes, but not just race. It's about police practices. The truth is they police Baltimore differently than they police, for example, Howard County, right? Which is, and interestingly, they cite this case in their motion that had to do with a civil suit against the police. And it's one of the only other ones where they found a case, their venue was transferred. And it was transferred in that case, and guess what happened? After a woman sued because they handcuffed her 7-year-old son, they moved that to Howard County, more white, more affluent. The jury found against the plaintiffs and for the police.
And this is in a civil suit?
In a civil suit, right.
If you were the defense attorneys for these cops, you would be filing this motion absolutely, right? Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely critical. And frankly, I think there's very little chance that these officers will ever face a Baltimore jury. I think it is likely that the venue motion will be granted, and if it does, and if it isn't, I suspect they'll waive a jury. Oh, that's interesting. Talk about that waiving a jury, because we saw that in the Cleveland case. Yes, that was what's called a bench trial, right? The judge presided over that. That's and handed down the verdict of not guilty to the officer in the shooting of that couple that was being chased in a car. Why do you think they would waive a jury? Well, I think they've made it clear in their papers. That is, they do not believe that they can get a fair trial from a jury in Baltimore. They just think that the dynamics are too sort of not in their favor, too against them. And by the way, I don't think that they're wrong about that. And Chris, let me say this too. I'm for changes of venue. I'm for fairness. I just wish that this doctrine meant something outside these cases. Right. Basically, your frustration, having worked as a defense attorney, is all of a sudden things become so much, the scales that are so tipped against the defense in all normal circumstances, all of the things we talk about due process, innocent until proven guilty, going through all these checks on overreaching of prosecution, suddenly start to mean something when the people being prosecuted are the police. It's astonishing. And what's really funny is, I mean, think about it. Dohar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, no change of venue, right? I mean, if there's ever someone who, I mean, you know, had an uphill battle with a jury pool in a city that was unbelievably traumatized and terrorized by this mass murder, it was that trial. I'll give you another one. Jeff Skilling in Houston, denied, right? And so, but what's really crazy is, in Rodney King, granted, and here's what's really funny about that whole thing, is that one of the better sentencing decisions ever to come from the United States Supreme Court, U.S. v. Coons, that's Stacey Coons. Oh, right. David Figa, thank you very much. All right, up next, disturbing details about the surveillance video.